The employer mandate of the Affordable Care Act (ACA), commonly known as Obamacare, introduced significant changes to the healthcare and employment landscapes. In the United States, this mandate required businesses with 50 or more full-time employees to provide health insurance or face penalties. While aimed at expanding healthcare access, the policy has sparked debates over its economic impact, particularly on small businesses and the job market. The mandate created financial pressure. Welcome to Presidential Papers. Have you ever wondered how the United States became the nation it is today? This channel dives deep into the decisions and policies of America's presidents, revealing the stories that built the nation. Backed by rigorous research and academic insights, we simplify complex history into engaging narratives. Whether you're a history enthusiast or just curious about America's foundations, this is the place for you. Join us as we uncover the secrets of the past, one presidential policy at a time. Subscribe now to start the journey. When Donald Trump assumed office in 2017, he brought with him a bold, unconventional approach to governance that captivated his supporters and alarmed his critics. His presidency, marked by sweeping executive orders, inflammatory rhetoric, and an unapologetic disregard for traditional norms, sparked heated debates across the nation. While his supporters hailed him as a disruptor of the political status quo, others argued that his actions profoundly weakened America's democratic institutions and exacerbated partisan divisions. Democratic institutions, such as the judicial system, free press, and the rule of law, are the bedrock of any functioning democracy. Yet, during Trump's tenure, critics allege he undermined these institutions. From publicly criticizing judges and their rulings to referring to the media as the enemy of the people, such actions not only eroded public trust, but also emboldened authoritarian tendencies in some corners of the political landscape. Furthermore, the presidency of Donald Trump coincided with a period of increasing polarization in the United States, as party loyalty often took precedence over governance, deepening divides between Republicans and Democrats. But was Trump's role simply a reflection of existing tensions? Or did his leadership actively amplify these challenges? This question lies at the heart of ongoing scholarly debates. By examining academic research and key policy decisions, we can gain insights into the systemic and cultural impacts of his presidency. In the following discussion, we will explore two major arguments. First, how Trump's presidency weakened democratic institutions, and second, how it fueled excessive partisan divisions within political institutions. Through these points, we aim to provide a balanced, in-depth analysis of one of the most polarizing eras in American political history. As for many small businesses, leading to a decline in wages and employee benefits. Small enterprises, already operating on thin margins, faced increased costs to comply with the ACA's insurance requirements. Studies suggest that businesses responded by cutting back on wage increases or reducing other forms of compensation to offset these expenses, particularly in states with higher insurance premiums. The financial strain on small businesses became more pronounced, disproportionately affecting low-wage employees who were most vulnerable to such cost adjustments. The employer mandate also influenced employment patterns, reshaping the job market in several ways. One notable impact was the rise in part-time employment. To avoid reaching the threshold of 50 full-time employees and incurring penalties, many businesses deliberately capped work hours or shifted full-time roles to part-time positions. This trend was especially evident in industries reliant on low-skilled labor, such as retail and hospitality. Such measures may have restricted workers' earning potential and job stability, further exacerbating economic insecurity for those at the lower end of the income spectrum. In conclusion, the employer mandate under the ACA had notable adverse effects on small businesses and the job market. By increasing operational costs, it incentivized businesses to limit employee hours, reduce wage growth, and restructure workforce patterns. These outcomes were particularly pronounced in regions where insurance costs were higher, disproportionately affecting vulnerable workers. While the ACA succeeded in expanding healthcare access, its employer mandate highlighted the delicate balance between policy objectives and economic realities. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback, so feel free to share them in the comments section. Let's continue exploring American history together through papers in the next episode. One of the primary reasons supporting the assertion that Donald Trump's presidency weakened democratic institutions and exacerbated partisan divisions within American political institutions is his consistent violation of democratic norms. These actions not only undermine the foundational principles of American democracy, but also intensified political polarization, creating lasting damage to the structures and practices that uphold democratic governance. Democratic norms serve as the unwritten principles that ensure the smooth functioning of democratic governance. These include respect for judicial independence, adherence to free and fair elections, protection of civil liberties, and the maintenance of a free press. These norms form the foundation of trust between institutions and citizens, ensuring accountability, transparency, and effective governance. Trump's presidency was marked by unprecedented breaches of these norms, as documented in scholarly research. One of the most prominent examples is his repeated verbal assaults on the press, branding them as enemies of the people, and dismissing unfavorable reporting as fake news. These attacks undermined public trust in the media, a vital institution for holding leaders accountable and providing citizens with accurate information. According to research, trust in media reached historic lows during Trump's presidency, reflecting the deep erosion of a key democratic pillar. Further, Trump exhibited a blatant disregard for the judiciary's independence. He openly criticized judges whose rulings did not align with his preferences, referring to them as so-called judges and questioning their legitimacy. Such behavior poses a direct challenge to the separation of powers, a core principle of the U.S. Constitution, which ensures that no branch of government operates without checks and balances. Trump's rhetoric and actions also cast doubt on the validity of democratic elections. His refusal to accept the results of the 2020 presidential election, despite a lack of evidence supporting his claims of widespread voter fraud, exemplifies this pattern. By continuously promoting baseless conspiracy theories, Trump not only delegitimized a cornerstone of democratized electoral process but also encouraged millions of his supporters to question the legitimacy of democratic institutions as a whole. Research also highlights the role of Trump's populist and authoritarian tendencies in weakening democratic norms. Scholars such as McCoy and Summer have noted that while political polarization can sometimes clarify ideological differences and enhance democratic competition, Trump's approach exacerbated polarization to destructive levels. His divisive rhetoric, which often included xenophobic and misogynistic undertones, deepened societal fractures. For example, his framing of immigrants as criminals and his demonization of opponents with derogatory nicknames, such as Crooked Hillary and Little Marco fostered an us versus them mentality that made bipartisan cooperation nearly impossible. This polarization was further amplified by Trump's open admiration for authoritarian leaders, including Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un, and his dismissive attitude toward international agreements. By undermining long-standing alliances and embracing nationalist policies under the banner of America First, Trump distanced the United States from its role as a global proponent of democracy. This shift not only weakened international democratic norms, but also sent a troubling signal domestically, reinforcing authoritarian-like governance strategies. Trump's attacks extended beyond political opponents and the media to independent agencies and law enforcement institutions. His firing of FBI Director James Comey and his repeated criticisms of the intelligence community demonstrated an unwillingness to tolerate dissent or oversight. Such actions weakened the integrity of democratic institutions, creating a culture where loyalty to the leader supersedes accountability and the rule of law. Another critical aspect of Trump's presidency was the rise of negative partisanship, where political identity became increasingly defined by opposition to the other party, rather than support for one's own. Trump's use of inflammatory language and divisive rhetoric intensified this dynamic, making compromise and bipartisan policymaking exceedingly rare. Studies have shown that such polarization erodes trust in democratic institutions and reduces the ability of governments to function effectively. Trump's influence on the Republican Party also deepened this divide. Under his leadership, the party underwent a significant transformation, prioritizing loyalty to Trump over adherence to traditional conservative principles. This shift made it increasingly difficult for party members to hold Trump accountable for actions that violated democratic norms. A study by Fang and Thao found that Republican voters were more likely to excuse norm violations if framed as necessary for achieving party goals. This dynamic not only weakened internal checks within the party, but also contributed to the erosion of broader democratic accountability. Critics of this perspective argue that Trump's actions were a reaction to a broken political system, and should be viewed as an attempt to challenge the status quo rather than as an assault on democracy. They contend that his rhetoric and behavior, while unconventional, reflected a broader frustration with political elites, and resonated with a significant portion of the American electorate. However, this argument fails to account for the long-term consequences of normalizing behavior that undermines democratic norms. For example, while some supporters saw Trump's attacks on the media as a necessary pushback against perceived bias, the broader impact was a significant decline in public trust across all news sources. This erosion of trust impairs the ability of citizens to make informed decisions and weakens the accountability mechanisms that are essential for a functioning democracy. Similarly, Trump's challenges to the electoral process, framed by his supporters as efforts to ensure election integrity, lacked credible evidence and ultimately served to delegitimize the electoral system. Such actions not only undermined confidence in elections, but also set a dangerous precedent for future leaders who might seek to exploit public mistrust for political gain. This part concludes that Donald Trump's presidency significantly weakened American democratic institutions through repeated violations of democratic norms and the promotion of authoritarian tendencies. His actions eroded public trust in the media, judiciary, and electoral process, while his rhetoric deepened political polarization and undermined the principles of bipartisan governance. Addressing these challenges will require a recommitment to democratic values, and a concerted effort to rebuild trust in the institutions that underpin American democracy. Only by reaffirming these principles can the United States repair the damage and restore the integrity of its political institutions. The second major reason supporting the assertion that Donald Trump's presidency weakened democratic institutions and exacerbated excessive partisan divisions within political institutions lies in his administration's cultivation and exploitation of negative partisanship. This concept, defined by A. Abramowitz and Jennifer McCoy in their seminal work, United States Racial Resentment, Negative Partisanship, and Polarization in Trump's America, highlights a critical transformation in American political dynamics. Negative partisanship refers to a phenomenon where voters are motivated less by loyalty to their own political party and more by hostility towards the opposing party and its leaders. Under Trump's presidency, this animosity reached unprecedented levels, deeply eroding democratic norms and institutions. Negative partisanship surged during Trump's presidency as both Democrats and Republicans increasingly viewed the opposing party not merely as political rivals, but as existential threats to the nation's well-being. This polarization was particularly evident during the 2016 presidential election, which set records for effective polarization, a measure of the emotional divide between partisans. According to the American National Election Studies Inc.'s data cited in Abramowitz and McCoy's research, both Trump and his opponent, Hillary Clinton, were intensely disliked by members of the opposing party. For instance, while Democratic voters rated Clinton an average of 71 degrees on a feeling thermometer, they rated Trump at a mere 19 degrees. Conversely, Republican voters rated Trump at 65 degrees, but gave Clinton an average rating of just 12 degrees. These stark contrasts illustrate the deep emotional animosity that Trump's campaign and rhetoric amplified. Trump's explicit appeals to racial and cultural resentment further entrenched this divide. His rhetoric and policies, including the Muslim travel ban, the border wall proposal, and frequent attacks on racial and ethnic minorities, polarized the electorate along ideological and cultural lines. This strategy, while consolidating his base among white, working-class voters, alienated college-educated whites and non-white voters, as detailed in Abramowitz and McCoy's study. The deliberate stoking of racial and cultural grievances not only deepened societal divisions, but also undermined the foundational democratic principle of pluralism, which necessitates the peaceful coexistence of diverse groups within a shared political framework. Another critical dimension of Trump's exploitation of negative partisanship lies in his relentless attacks on democratic norms and institutions. As J. Hopes, the Trump-era legacy of partisanism elucidates, Trump's presidency was marked by a profound disregard for the constitutional principles that underpin American democracy. His rhetoric often sought to delegitimize key institutions, including the judiciary, the media, and the electoral process. For instance, Trump's baseless claims of widespread voter fraud in the 2020 election, claims that were debunked by numerous courts and independent investigations, served to erode public trust in the integrity of the electoral system. According to a Pew Research Center study, by 2021, nearly two-thirds of Republican voters believed that the election was stolen, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. This belief, rooted in Trump's persistent misinformation, reflects the extent to which negative partisanship can distort democratic accountability and truth. Social media platforms amplified these dynamics, as algorithms designed to maximize engagement often prioritized divisive and emotionally charged content. As Larry M. Bartels notes in Partisanship in the Trump Era, Trump's use of social media to directly communicate with his base bypassed traditional gatekeepers like the press, enabling him to perpetuate a narrative of grievance and victimhood. This strategy not only consolidated his supporters but also exacerbated distrust in mainstream media outlets, which he frequently labeled as fake news. The erosion of a shared information environment, a cornerstone of democratic deliberation, further entrenched partisan divisions and weakened the ability of institutions to mediate political conflict. Critics might argue that Trump's presidency merely accelerated trends that were already evident in American politics. Indeed, Abramowitz and McCoy acknowledged that racial, ideological, and cultural polarization had been growing for decades due to demographic and cultural changes. However, Trump's unique rhetorical style and governing approach amplified these divisions to an unprecedented degree. His administration's explicit embrace of us versus them politics transformed pre-existing tensions into a defining feature of political discourse. For example, the Capitol riot on January 6, 2021, was not merely a spontaneous expression of political discontent, but the culmination of months of incendiary rhetoric and conspiracy theories propagated by Trump and his allies. As Bartels highlights, this event underscores the dangers of partisanism, a form of blind, unyielding loyalty to one's party that prioritizes group identity over democratic principles. To counter claims that the heightened partisanship under Trump was symmetrical across political parties, it is essential to examine empirical data. Research by Abramowitz and McCoy reveals that, while Democrats and Republicans both exhibited strong partisan loyalty, the intensity of negative feelings toward the opposing party was significantly higher among Republicans. This asymmetry is evident in survey data, showing that Republican voters were more likely to view Democratic policies as an existential threat to the nation. Such perceptions, fueled by Trump's rhetoric, have had tangible consequences for governance. For instance, during Trump's tenure, bipartisan cooperation in Congress reached historic lows, as legislative initiatives were increasingly framed as zero-sum battles, rather than opportunities for compromise. The erosion of bipartisan norms undermines the deliberative processes that are essential for a functioning democracy. In response to these developments, some commentators on social media and opinion platforms have suggested that the polarization under Trump's presidency was a natural reaction to decades of political alienation experienced by his base. While there is merit to the argument that economic and cultural dislocation contributed to Trump's appeal, this perspective overlooks the deliberate strategies employed by his administration to exacerbate divisions. For example, policies like the Muslim travel ban and the separation of immigrant families at the border were not only controversial, but also unnecessary from a governance perspective, serving primarily to energize Trump's base by reinforcing narratives of us versus them. Moreover, critics who argue that Trump's presidency merely reflected existing societal divisions fail to account for the long-term damage inflicted on democratic institutions. As Pope notes, Trump's presidency normalized behaviors that were previously considered antithetical to democratic governance, such as refusing to concede an election and inciting violence against political opponents. These actions have set dangerous precedents that future leaders, regardless of party affiliation, may exploit. The erosion of democratic norms is not merely a reflection of societal divisions. but a direct consequence of leadership that prioritizes partisan loyalty over institutional integrity. The conclusion of this part of the analysis is clear. Trump's presidency significantly deepened partisan divisions and weakened democratic institutions through the cultivation of negative partisanship, by stoking racial and cultural grievances, undermining trust in democratic processes, and normalizing divisive rhetoric. Trump's administration accelerated trends that threatened the stability of American democracy. While polarization is not unique to the Trump era, the intensity and asymmetry of negative partisanship under his leadership represent a critical turning point. The challenge moving forward is to rebuild democratic norms and institutions in a political environment that remains deeply divided. Donald Trump's presidency marked a controversial period in American political history, raising critical questions about the health of democratic institutions and the intensification of partisan divisions. His actions and rhetoric during his time in office brought significant scrutiny, with experts debating the extent to which his leadership undermined democratic norms and amplified political polarization. This essay argues that Trump's presidency weakened democratic institutions and exacerbated partisan divisions within political systems. Supported by key evidence and analysis, Trump's presidency undeniably challenged the foundations of America's democratic institutions. His repeated attacks on the legitimacy of elections, such as his unfounded claims of widespread voter fraud in the 2020 presidential election, undermined public confidence in the electoral process. These claims culminated in the January 6, 2021 Capitol insurrection, where Trump supporters stormed the legislative branch, disrupting the certification of electoral votes, according to a report from the Brookings Institution. This event represented a direct assault on democratic norms, showcasing the fragility of America's institutional safeguards. Additionally, Trump's frequent dismissal of checks and balances, such as his firing of inspectors general and challenges to judicial decisions, eroded key mechanisms that ensure accountability and transparency in governance. Another critical consequence of Trump's presidency was the intensification of partisan divisions. By leveraging polarizing rhetoric, such as branding political opponents as enemies of the people and promoting divisive policies, Trump further deepened the ideological chasm between Republicans and Democrats. Political analysts from Pew Research Center observed that partisan animosity reached unprecedented levels during his administration, with Americans increasingly viewing members of the opposing party not merely as competitors, but as existential threats to their values. Furthermore, his dominance over the Republican Party transformed it into a vehicle of personal loyalty rather than traditional conservatism, marginalizing moderates and escalating polarization in Congress. In conclusion, Donald Trump's presidency accelerated existing societal and political fractures, eroding trust in democratic institutions and entrenching partisan conflicts. While some of these trends predate his administration, his leadership style and actions undoubtedly exacerbated them, leaving a legacy of division that continues to influence American politics today. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback, so feel free to share them in the comments section. Let's continue exploring American history together through papers in the next episode.